Richardson and members of the Oil and Gas Land Management Commission. My name is Cathy Cowan Becker. I'm a longtime supporter of Ohio public lands, and I've had the pleasure of visiting many of our state parks for conferences and just recreation. I'm here to testify today about Draft Rule 155-101, which purports to oversee the process of leasing public lands to oil and gas companies for drilling, fracking, and other extraction. So there are multiple issues with this rule. A lot of people here have spoken very eloquently to some of them. The ones I'm going to touch on are lack of public involvement, discrepancy over surface impacts, climate and health impacts, and fracking our public lands to provide tax cuts for the rich. So on public involvement, when this commission met last February, and the last time we had public testimony, we had 15 Ohioans asking for robust public involvement. And we also had almost 700 comments sent in, and I actually pulled down that file, went through all of them, and every one of them, not one, supported fracking, and every one of them asked for more public involvement, especially 60 days notice, email notifications, online parcel maps. There were 6 points that you can go back and ask. But none of those made it into the rule. Some watered down versions made it into the guidelines, but those don't have the force of law. Then in the March 1st meeting, we were not allowed to speak at all, and you heard about a very one-sided presentation about how much money you can make or has been made fracking the Muskegon watershed over the past 10 years. But some people who were there live in that area and were not allowed to speak, but could provide a very different perspective. And if you are not gathering information about the effects of fracking from the people who actually live in these watersheds and in the areas being fracked, you can't possibly make a wise decision about fracking on public lands because you only have one side of the story. Okay, second up is the surface impacts discrepancy. As you know, the draft lease form that's making its way through the approval process does not include approval for surface impacts. These are things like fracking rigs, access roads, pipelines, timber removal, a lot of water withdrawals on public land, and that's good because we don't want that. But what the lease form does say about surface impacts is even worse. It says to the oil and gas industry, if you want those surface impacts, after this is approved, you go make a separate agreement with the state agency. And that's worse than if those requests would have come through the commission, because that means when you consider a parcel for leasing, you're not going to know the plans that the industry has for that parcel. You won't be able to make a responsible decision about leasing that parcel because you aren't considering surface impacts. You don't even know if they're going to happen. And instead, that agreement will be made directly with the agency, and there will be no public notice, no comment, and no oversight by you, the commission. In his signing statement, Governor DeWine promised there would be no surface impacts in our state parks. But some of these parks are quite large, and there's no way to get to the oil and gas that's under them in the middle of the park without surface impacts. And given this discrepancy that they can go after the fact to the state agency, we just simply don't believe that there will be no surface impacts. Governor DeWine needs to keep his promise to protect our state parks from the ravages of the oil and gas industry. Okay, next up is climate and health impacts, and people here have spoken incredibly eloquently about that. I'll try not to repeat what they said, but it's just striking to me that in 3 meetings of this commission that I've been to, I have never heard anyone here utter the words climate or health even once. It's not even part of your decision making. And if that's not part of your decision making on this, you are missing the boat. Absolutely. Besides our people who testified here today, you can go to Physicians for Social Responsibility. They have compiled a compendium of research on the health impacts every year for the past 9 years. The latest one has links to 2,000 abstracts of medical, scientific, and investigative reports. So you should go take a look at that and see what they say. Carolyn Harding spoke about the radioactivity and the PFAS contamination in the fracking process, and they talk about that as well. And why would we do that anywhere near our parks that are supposed to be protected and for the enjoyment of our people? And then on climate, Aaron Dunbar has given incredible testimony about the IPCC's, in March, just last month of last year, their final warning to humanity about the need for deep and swift cuts to greenhouse gas emissions. And I think you have my written testimony. I won't go into too much of it. Just to say that the science, every time a new scientific report comes out about how fast the ice is melting, how much worse the storms are getting, it's more than they thought, because they're not factoring in the feedback loops. And we are looking at runaway warming. If we don't cut emissions in half, at least by the end of this decade, we're talking very near term. And the only way we're going to cut emissions in half in the near term is to lower methane, because that's responsible for most of the new emissions because of the fracking boom, and because it's 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Unfortunately, in Ohio, it's as if the climate crisis doesn't exist. We have a state legislature that has declared fracked gas to be green. And even if it burns cleaner at the plant, it is not greener. Besides its much stronger effect, and methane emissions have exploded in recent years. And because of the leaks and the flares, there's leaking and flaring that is not counted during the fracking process, the extraction process. Scientists estimate that methane emissions, because of the energy sector, are actually 70% higher than official figures. So we are not going to lower methane emissions if we are fracking on our public lands. That's not going to happen. And if you vote to allow it to happen, then I hope you don't have children and grandchildren, because I don't know how you'd be able to look them in the eye. You will have sold out their future. And just to the oil and gas industry, there is a very profitable, very much growing industry in clean energy. They need to change their business model. They've killed the planet long enough. They've hid what they're doing for 40 years. We know that. And it's time for them to change their business model. So finally is the idea of fracking on public lands to give tax cuts to the rich. And of all the arguments I've heard for fracking on our public lands, this one has to be the stupidest. Republicans in the Ohio legislature want a flat tax, and some are claiming that revenue from fracking our public lands can pay for it. So according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, a flat tax in Ohio would cost about $2 billion per year. Of that, 89% would benefit the richest 20% of households, and 35% of it benefiting the richest 1%, and the rest of us would end up holding the bag with little or nothing to show for it. Nor would it result in revenue to make up this difference. In fact, it would make the situation worse. So a study by Ohio River Valley Institute found that our 7 eastern counties in the shale play since the fracking boom began have all seen declines in jobs, revenue, income, and population. And even if it could provide some revenue, that would taper off after a few years as frack wells run dry. So the industry's own proposal, Encina's own proposal from the documents that Roxanne got through a public records request, they're only showing 6 years, and that's actually extremely optimistic. But even then, after 6 years, there's no more revenue. So that is not going to pay for tax cuts for the rich. But what does provide continuous and growing revenue stream is preserving our state parks, preserving our forests, preserving our wildlife areas for Ohioans to enjoy as they were intended. So a study from Ohio State University that Laurel Hobden quoted found that Ohioans take 171 million outdoor recreational trips each year. They spend $5.9 billion. They employ about 133,000 workers. And they add $8.1 billion to our state economy every year, and that's because we have preserved our parks. No one wants to hike or camp or fish or hunt or go boating where frack rigs are injecting millions of gallons of toxic water into the ground and flaring off methane into the air. Why would we put all of this at risk to enrich the oil and gas industry? They can find a new business model. They can make a ton of money off of solar and wind if they wanted to. It would be cheaper and easier just to pay the people who own the mineral rights. I can understand why they would want to be paid for that. Just pay them and preserve our parks. Thank you again for allowing me to testify, and please listen to the people who have spoken here and do the right thing.
Yes.